Hello students, good morning to all of you. Welcome to this virtual class. Today we'll start new chapter, that is economic reforms since 1991 or new economy policies or liberalization, privatizations, globalizations, that is called LPG. Before we start that new chapter economic reforms, we have already discussed that British colonial systems, and after the independence from 1947 to 1990, agriculture policies, foreign trade policies, as well as different features, problems, policies, as well as also there were the different objectives of 5-year plans up to the 12th 5-year plans, public sector expenditures, GDP, and contributions toward the national income or GDP from different sectors, agriculture sectors, industrial sectors or manufacturing sectors, and services sectors. So whatever the policies, 1951 policies, that is that 17 industries of that schedule A, 12 industries in the schedule B, and except this 29 industries, all other that schedule C. And implementation of the 5-year plans, we have to extend our different GDP in the different 5-year plans. So we have consolidated the different past gains up to the 1990. Economic reforms since 1991. Why do we need that economic reforms? Or first of all, we have to know that what do we mean by economic reforms. Economic reforms, we mean change in the set of policies. Change in the set of policies. Change in the set of policies. We have already known industrial policy, license policies, privatizations, globalizations, liberalization, what we will start in this chapter, liberalization, privatization and globalizations. And we have already discussed 1951 industrial policy, IPR, industrial policy resolution, as well as we have already known the role of the public sectors, different kinds of nationalized bank, public sector banks, trade policies, and presently we are dealing also Bombay Stock Exchange, NSE, National Stock Exchange, you have already known from the business studies. So these are the different kinds of policies. So this change in the set of policies from one period of time to another, from one period of time to another, that is called that economic reforms. This is called that economic reforms. What do economy reforms? Change in the set of policies from one period of time to another. That is called that economic reforms. हिंदी में हम क्या बोलते हैं? सुधार. I will ask that some questions. In that corona period or COVID-19 pandemic situations, you have changed your nature, you have changed at some extent to survive yourselves. Why? You know very well. That is wearing that mask, proper sanitization, and that 6 feet distance, social distancing systems. This changes from one period to another to survive yourself, to become that safety, to increase your standard of living, to increase your life expectancy, increasing that life expectancy as well as that literacy rates. So different policies we have implemented from time to time. That is, the objective is that we will become that self-dependent, we will become that self-reliant, we will be that most one developed countries, as well as we have to produce the different infrastructure facilities, economy infrastructure, social infrastructures. It means always every country wants to become the world number one. That is the objectives. So that is why we change this policy from one period to another period. That is called the economy reforms. Every nation formulates and adopts the set of policy to achieve the targets and goals. Every year, India targets the different types of goals. Atmanirbhar, self-dependent, self-realizations. This year that Modi government is taking the decisions, Atmanirbharta. How we become that self-reliant? How we can create that more and more employment opportunities? How we will be independent? How we will stand by our own self? We will not import that different kinds of goods what we require, like the defense equipments. These are the different nations' targets and goals, so that we change that set of policies to achieve our goals. Dear students, in the process of implementation of this policy, we face the different kinds of difficulties or the constraints, obstacles to achieve our goals. Dear students, you have to make your own future. You want to keep your target, that is 99% mark, or that in the district topper or the state topper. So whenever you keep these targets, you have to face that lot of problems, lot of difficulties. Despite that COVID-19 pandemic, in the NEET exam, that 1-2 students score that full mark, maximum marks. So these are the achievements. These are the targets. So whenever we want to achieve the targets, we face the different kinds of difficulties or constraints or the obstacles. Because it may not be in a position to reach the set of goals and targets without any kinds of difficulties or the constraints. You have to do that hard work. You have to increase your concentration of powers. So over a period of time, it may reframe the different policies. Like whenever your exam comes, at that time you do the different kinds of time management course, time management studies, how you can capture all the subject by writing different sample papers. These are the policies you implement. Likewise, the country also implement the different kinds of policies to reach these targets or to reach their goals. So every country has that some specific goals. That is why we need that economic reforms. So before we start that economic reforms, new economic policies, and if we that is also called that NEP, New Economic Policies 1991. The government of India initiated that series of economic reforms to pull the economic out of the different crises. Although we tried so many ways to achieve our goals, some extent we reach our target, some extent we are failure to reach our targets. So whenever we take this new economic policy, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalizations, we have to go backward. What are the problems we have faced, and what are the target we have reached, and how much we have to take the necessary steps to reach our targets. That is why we need our assessments. That is why we need our assessments, so that the student should appear the different types of tests: half-yearly, annual, pre-board, first term, second term, etc. Class tests. So immediately after the independence, in 1947, India set out to reach the goals of rapid economic development. How we can increase our standard of living, how we can capable to reach our GDP 8%, 9%, 10% like this. So that in the year of 1951, we launched that first 5-year plan. We have already crossed the 12 5-year plans, 2012 to 2017. So the reforms came to be known in the 1991 to achieve our targets, to achieve our goals. That is called the new economic policies. So this new economic policies, which is to be called that, one is liberalizations, another is that privatizations, another is that globalizations. We will discuss in detail about three: liberalization, privatization, and globalizations. The policy liberalization in place, L, which is replaced to that licensing. Which replace to our policies licensing. LICENSING, licensing. We have already known what do mean by licensing. We have already discussed in that last chapter. So the policy of liberalization, L in place, licensing, L for that licensing which was previously. Whenever I will discuss in detail about the liberalizations, then you will understand what about the licensing, why in place of licensing we introduce the liberalizations. The policy privatizations, it replace to that quotas. And the policy globalizations in place of permit that for exports and imports, permits of exports and imports. In place of licensing, quotas and permits of export and imports, we introduced, implement liberalizations, privatizations and globalizations respectively. It means the LPG was set up to replace that LQP. LPG was set up in place of LQP. Why this liberalizations, privatization, globalizations were implemented, or what is the need of this economic policies? क्या जरूरी हो गया इसको इस तरीके से हम चेंज करने के लिए? The government decided to play the major role in the economy in order to achieve that set of goals, set of targets. All that key basic industries were exclusively reserved for the public sector industries as per the 1951 industrial policies. 17 industries plus Schedule A, Schedule B, 12 industries, and other all that private sectors which are guided or controlled by that government sectors. And you have already known that during this industrial policy 1951, we have emphasized on that role of public sectors. Why do we need that public sectors? Because it requires that heavy capitals, long gestation periods, and return is very much or long times. That is why we need to change these policies. Only that public sector could not develop to that whole economies. And whenever I was discussing the last period about the problems of that foreign trade, problems of foreign trade, that means what are the problems? Rising deficits or fiscal deficits, burdens, that is rising burden of subsidies, different kinds of policies I was discussing, that is the rising trade deficits, foreign exchange rates, and rising debt burden, rising subsidy bills. Again I repeat, that is the problems of India's foreign trade or international trade. Rising trade deficits, rising exchange rate or exchange crisis, rising the debt burdens, and rising subsidies bill. These are the 4 or 5 points which were the problems of the international trade from 1950 to 1991. So to recover these problems, we need that new economic policies. In this case, that as per the different books, you have already known why do we need. Because ये सारे जो rising burden of deficits, rising trade deficits, or rising exchange crisis, rising debt burden, or rising the subsidies bill. Again I repeating, first point is the rising the trade deficit. First point was the trade deficit. रट जाना चाहिए क्लास में. Rising the trade deficits. Second, third, foreign exchange crisis. Foreign exchange crisis. One thing is related with that other things. Foreign exchange crisis, change systems. And rising that debt burden. Rising debt burden. BURDEN, burden. Rising trade deficit, foreign exchange crisis, rising the debt burden, and fourth is that subsidies, rising the subsidy bill. Rising subsidy bill. And I have already discussed debt, public debt. That is why we do need that maximum debt. So these are to be one kinds of problems of that foreign trade. What are the necessary steps we have already introduced to improve our quality or the standard of livings, or to increase that GDP or increase the per capita incomes? But these are the problems in different stages, not only the trade but also all these cases. So national economic education policies, NEP also national education policy, and NEP also new economic policies. The need for new economic policy reforms introduced or was essential at that time by the following reasons. What are the difficulties we are facing? As a 12th class students, you have already known that when we are discussing balance of payments, that is the fiscal deficit, primary deficit, foreign exchange crisis, inflations, role of the public sectors, etc. These are the points, remember it. which is related with the trade deficit, foreign exchange crisis, rising debt burden, and rising subsidies bill. So in balance of payment, you have known fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit, 1 point. In that balance of payments, we have all known current account, capital accounts. Similarly, fall in that foreign exchange reserves. So far that import and export is concerned, the different 5-year plans, import and export, I will send you today also. So that we need our implement of new economic policies. We need that new economic policies, that we need the reforms. Why? Because there was that high fiscal deficit. High fiscal deficit means when there is the deficits, that means the government, to fulfill their basic needs, we borrow the money from that any other countries or any other sources. So whenever that is deficit, it indicates that we are the poor, or we are the financially poor. Not only that financial grounds, but also that health grounds, but also for the infrastructure grounds, in educations, road, transportation, communications. So whenever that infrastructure is very poor, at that time the deficit is occurred. So that indicates to our inflation or the price rise in our economy process. So it triggers the inflations, which hinders or creates that obstacles to in the economic growth or in the process of economic growth. So whenever one country faces the different crisis, so far the international relation is concerned, that country will not get support from that foreign countries. You have already known that condition, what is going to be in that Pakistan, about that international problems whenever the country is not financially sound. So if we will go to that statistical data, it means fiscal deficit was estimated to be 5% of GDP. Fiscal deficit was estimated 5.8% of the GDP. Remember it, 5.8% of the GDP. It means that whenever we are calculating that gross domestic product you have already known, the total money value of goods and services produced in an economy in an accounting year is to be known as that gross domestic products. So that gross domestic product indicates, that means you are that how much or what positions so far your economic condition is concerned. Whenever you will compare with the developed countries or any other countries, if your GDP is maximum, it means you are in that in the sound positions. So if this fiscal deficit we will calculate or we will compare in the different periods or different years, it means the fiscal deficit was estimated to be 5.4% of the GDP. 5.4% of GDP. Remember it. In the year of 81-82, that is in the year of 1981-82, the 5.4% of GDP was the fiscal deficit. But in the year of 1991, the deficit shot up, or it increases up to that 8.4% of GDP in the year of 1990. It means gradually that our deficit is going to be increased. That is that perennial systems, 12 महीने में चलता रहता है, हमारा डेफिसिट इंक्रीज हो रहा है. 12 महीने हम बोलते हैं हमारे पास पैसा नहीं है, पैसा नहीं, पैसा नहीं. कोई बोलते हैं क्या पैसा है हमारे पास? कोई बोलते हैं हम गरीब नहीं है? नहीं है हमेशा. That is why on that day I was saying like this, that why Indian is poor? Because he is poor. So these conditions, these natures, these habits, which is pulled down to each and everyone, that is why that time the fiscal deficit was increasing, that as per our statistical data 5.4% to 8.4% of the GDP. So it indicates, it means what are the policies we have been already implemented, that policies was not updated to increase our standard of living, to increase our GDP, or to make that good relations with that international relations, that to increase our exports, so far trade is concerned. That is why we introduce the new education policy, new economic policies, which is that most important part to reduce this fiscal deficits. Because in the balance of payments, we have already known there are different kinds of crisis. So far that current account is concerned, so far that capital account is concerned, balance of trade and balance of payments. So similarly, if there will be that any kinds of balance of payment crisis, we have to borrow the money from the rest of the world. So that is why that current account deficit also, which was increased day by day. It means if we will study or if we will survey that statistical data about that current account data, that is that current account deficits, it means it was 2214 crores, 2214 crores of rupees in the year of 1980-81. Current account deficit, which was increased to 17,314 crores rupees, like this, 17,314 or 364 67 rupees, like crores of rupees in the year of 1990-91. So it means that current account deficits also to be increased. Why would we need? If your borrowing is increasing day by day, you are put in the trouble of the debt, that is called the debt trap. I have already explained. So that we need that new economic policies. And in the trade sector, I have already said, day by day we are exporting less and importing more. So whenever we are importing more, we have to pay that more and more foreign currencies. And it means if we are not exporting more, so we have no that foreign currencies, so we are liable to pay that foreign exchange or foreign currencies. In comparison of the import and exports, that foreign currency is to be reduced. This situation becomes so grave or serious for the governments, where that foreign currency will come to our countries. At that time, the country will, last but not least, the country will sell that what are the deposits of the assets, that is the gold. Remember it? When there was the government of the Chandrasekhar, Prime Minister, he sold that gold at that time because that country was suffering in such a that the liability was so high, because the interest which was increasing day by day, he was not able to solve all these problems. That is why he sold that gold. So to arrange these things accordingly, we need the new economic policies. So whenever the deficit will be more, it means there will the inflation. When there is the inflation, there will the price rise. When there is the price rise, that will boom up our economies. But really, the poor people, their purchasing power will be very less. They will suffer. It means people will die without food. And whenever there was that any kinds of famines, droughts, or any kinds of disasters, this transportation and communication facilities was not available at that times. So that lot of people were dying without this infrastructure facilities or lack of the infrastructure facilities. So this price rise, lack of infrastructure facilities, because at present times the government sector and the private sector both are coming to improve our standard of living during the disaster managements or during the disaster problems. We have that different scheme we have also made. So accordingly, poor performance of the public sectors, at present times we are introducing the different kinds of private sector or the privatizations. So many foreign companies they are coming. We have established that stock exchange markets. There is the direct investment or the foreign direct investments. So with regard to these changes, we are capable to manage ourselves. So with regard to these causes, we need that new economic policies, that is that liberalization and privatization and globalizations. So these policies, liberation, privatization and globalizations, which I was saying that L for liberalizations, that changes to liberty or license, that changes to that license, and P that privatizations in place of quotas, and globalizations, that is in place of the permit for exports and imports. So LPG was set to replace on LQP, that is that in 1991. So what are the objectives or need of the new economic policies? Whenever we studied that from 1950 to 1991, what are the problems we have been facing or we had been faced, that is to be required, that major objectives of the new economic policies, to whenever consolidate that past gains and to strengthen the growth of impulses in the economies. ग्रोथ ऑफ इम्पल्सेस इन द इकोनॉमीज, देखिए रोड अच्छा होना चाहिए, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जाते जाए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर्स, ऑल दीज थिंग्स, transportation facility, communication facilities, power sector, school or health, education, etc. These are the impulses in the economy. Remember it, the country where that populations are that 100% literacy populations, that country is that no doubt that GDP and the standard of living and that country must be the developed countries. So to strengthen the growth of impulses in the economy, we need that new economic policies. To increase our productions by that efficiency, or we may say that the resources allocated in such a way that full utilization of resources, which helps to that maximum productivities. You have well known from the business studies. As well as those workers, those employees who are working, they will get the trained, they must have the competitive abilities. Then it can help to increase our production units, to make use that global resources, our own progress of developments. What are the resources are available in the globals, in the globe, in the world, that resources are available, we can import that machines, etc. For our defense equipments, we are purchasing the so many machines, so many flights, etc. Weapons, these are the different global resources we are using for our safety point of view, for the defense backgrounds. So these are the objectives to require or to change or to implement of that new economic policies. So the elements of the new economic policy is liberalizations, privatizations, globalization. L, liberalization, P for privatizations, and G for globalizations. We have already changed so many policies, major policy changes. Industrial licensing, remember it, we have already changed. Producers are free to decide their scale level of productions. The quota systems, then the restrictions, tariff systems, which is that restriction for that imports and exports, and only we are given that priority to that public sector to establish that heavy industries or that capital goods industries. And that is why the multinational companies at present, what we are looking at, multinational companies at that time the door was closed. So that is called our open economies, that is called the liberalization. So we will go in detail one by one. At present times, those who are interested to come establish that any industry, they are welcomed to establish their own industries. They are free to establish their own industries. Not only the domestic entrepreneur, but also the foreign entrepreneurs, multinational companies, they are coming. So at that time, I have already said 3 acts. I have remembered. One is that IDRA, Industrial Development Regulation Act 1951. Another is that Monopoly Restricted Trade Practice Act, and third one is that Foreign Exchange Regulation Acts. That should be liberalized. Monopoly Restricted Trade Practice Act liberalized. Foreign Exchange Regulation Act have been almost totally dispensed with that new economic policy, that is the liberalization and privatization and globalizations. So imports of almost all the goods are freely allowed. There is no such kinds of restriction of the tariffs. There is quotas without any restrictions. All price and distribution controls have been removed. So we are liberal about the different kinds of policies. Liberal incentives are being given to the private entrepreneurs to come forward and establish their own industries. That is possible by the three elements of the new economic policies, that is liberalizations, privatization and globalizations. Let us discuss what do mean by liberalization. What do mean by liberalizations? Just I am introducing the liberalizations. So economy liberalization means giving greater freedom to economic agents to take their own decisions. If there will be no COVID-19 pandemic, you are roaming in the market without any works. This is your freedom. But at present time, if you want to go out from home, you have to take the permission, you have to wear the mask, and you have to take the proper sanitizations. All these are that restriction to all of you. But whenever we introduce the liberalizations, it means that we are free to take our own decisions. We get that freedom. Remember it. When you got that freedom in the year of 1947, that time how much you feel you're proud for your enjoyments. That kinds of facilities are given to that all the publics of an economy. Those who are producing the different kinds of goods and services, they will not take the depend to take the permission from the government's authorities. They will take their own decision how goods, what to be produced, how much to be produced, that allocation of resources, what to produce, how to produce and for whom to produce. There is the labor intensive method, capital intensive method, which method they have to introduce, that is their own decisions. So these kinds of policies, this is to be called the liberalizations. That is why, what do you know liberation? The economic liberalization means, I am saying about the economic liberalizations. Liberty means you will move anywhere for your own personal liberties. But I am saying about the economic liberation means the giving greater freedom. Remember it, giving greater freedom. I will not write, giving that greater freedom. Economic liberation means giving greater freedom. Giving greater freedom. What type freedom? रात को 12 बजे घूमना, जो इच्छा मर्जी जब उठे चला जाना, घर से निकल जाना, that freedom not. किसको फ्रीडम देंगे? Those producers are interested to produce that economic production of goods and services. That freedom given to that economic agents. Economic agents. It means industrialists. It means producers. It means those who are interested to take his own shoulder of his productions. That types of producers are to be called economic agents. So क्या freedom देवे इनको? To take their own decisions. To take their own decision. कोई भी producer, he is free to take his own decision what goods are to be produced. That resources that has. So that is the allocation of resources, central problems of economies. What to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So that kinds of decisions are taken by that producer, that is called the economic agents. That freedom when we will give to that economic agents, that is to be called that liberalizations. that is called that economic liberalizations. Again I repeat, economic liberalization means that giving that greater freedom to economic agents to take their own decision, that is to be called that liberalizations. Or we may say that liberalization means giving the freedom of the producing units from direct or physical controls imposed by the governments. So this is to be called that liberalization. Again I repeat, what do we mean liberalization? Liberalization or economic liberalization means giving greater freedom to economic agents to take their own decisions. To take their own decision, that is to be called that liberalizations. So this liberalizations means that producer will take initiatives to take their own decision about their production, about their consumption, about their anything. So economic freedom can take any of these ones, providing the more opportunity to give that private entrepreneurs. It means प्राइवेट प्रोड्यूसर को जो इंडस्ट्रियल लाइसेंसिंग था, लाइसेंस परमिशन लेने के बाद प्रोडक्शन करना है, ये सारा चीज हम लिबरल हो गए, प्रोवाइडिंग दैट मोर अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू द प्राइवेट एंटरप्रेन्योर्स, प्रोवाइडिंग दैट इट हेल्प्स प्रोवाइडिंग दैट अपॉर्चुनिटीज, प्रोवाइडिंग अपॉर्चुनिटी, एंटरप्रेन्योर को हम अपॉर्चुनिटी दे दीजिए। उसके साथ साथ हम क्या किए हैं, जो रेस्ट्रिक्शन था about the imports and exports, that restriction also be removed. Restrictions removed. Liberalization का अर्थ क्या हो जाता है देख लीजिए, giving that freedoms or giving that opportunities, providing that opportunities. And what are the restrictions? That is that restriction of the tariffs, quotas, ये सारा चीज को हम हटा दिए। उसके साथ साथ the price of the goods will be how much? That is that essential goods. अभी भी सिस्टम है, पब्लिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन सिस्टम है, प्राइस पॉलिसी है, बट whenever we give the freedom to the private entrepreneurs, the private entrepreneurs will take the one decision about the price. The pricing policies are done by that himself or that producer. That is that pricing policies. इसके अंदर में हम इनको फ्रीडम दे दिए, किसको? दिस इकोनॉमी एजेंट को और दैट प्रोड्यूसर को। We give the freedoms as well as all distribution of goods to be made freely. The producer will decide when, where and how they will produce. When, where and how. Where he has to establish the industries, which methods he has to be implemented. All these kinds of decisions are to be taken by that private persons or the private entrepreneurs, or that is called that economic agents. And what are the tariff or tax? What was that implemented? That was also to be reduced. I am giving the one example of that income tax. That time, if the people was earning that 100 rupees, at that time he was giving the 97.5 with the income tax, but the tax slab when will be calculated below that 5 lakhs, it is nil at present times. So tax was also to be reduced. Tax reduction of that private entrepreneurs or that economic agents. So in short, we may say that liberalization means reduce the role of the governments and giving that greater freedom, role of the freedoms to that economic agents, to that economy producers or to that private entrepreneurs is to be called that liberalizations. But remember this, liberalizations and market oriented are not same things, are not the same things. Some extent is similar, but real sense market oriented means to produce that maximum outputs, but liberalization and market oriented exactly not same things. Thank you students. Next period we'll meet with that more privatizations and that globalizations. Thanks to all of you.